Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we are going to be diving back into the works of Plato. This is Plato's Republic, Book 5. We are starting fresh in Book 5. We ended up in Book 4 with talking about the types of government, and the first type being of two, but it is one exceptional individual being in charge. And now we're going to get into more descriptions of government and how to identify them real quick. Sorry, I'll try to remember to cut that out. Well, a city like this and such a form of government, and a man of this sort too, I call good and right. And if this indeed is right, I call the others bad. And wide of the mark in relation to the management of cities and provision for the type of soul of their private citizens. There are four forms of degeneracy in cities. What are they, he asked. And as I was about to speak of these four in turn and how, in my view, they evolve from one another, Polemarchus, who was seated farther from Adeimantus, reached out his hand and grabbed his garment from above and around the shoulder and drew the man towards him, stretched forward, leaned towards him, and said a few things, none of which we could hear, except, well, shall we let this go, said he, or what shall we do? Not in the least, said Adeimantus, speaking loudly at this stage. And, I said, what precisely are you not letting go? You, said he. Because of what precisely? We think that you are taking the easy way, and cheated us out of a whole section of the argument, an important one at that, so that you do not have to go through it in detail. And you think you will get away with it saying glibly that, of course, in the case of women and children, it is obvious to everyone that friends will have all things in common. Is that not right, Adeimantus? Said I. Yes, said he, but right, like everything else, requires explanation. Common in what sense? Indeed, it could be meant in many ways, so do not just pass on. Tell us what sense you intend, since we have been waiting for some time, expecting you somehow to mention the procreation of children. How will this happen? And how will they be reared once they have been born? And explain this whole issue of women and children being in common that you were speaking of. For we believe that arranging this correctly or incorrectly is of enormous significance, on the whole, to a system of government. So, now, since you are in the process of tackling another form of government before dealing properly with these issues, we are resolved, as you heard, not to let you proceed until you have gone through all these details, just as you did with the others. And you can include me in that vote too, said Glaucon. Indeed, Socrates, said Thrasymachus, you may regard this as a resolution of us all. What have you done tackling me like this? What an enormous argument you are setting in train. It is like starting all over again from the beginning about the form of government. When I was pleased that this had been dealt with already, being satisfied if someone would allow all this and accept what was said at the time. Now, when you call these matters into question, you do not realize what a swarm of arguments you are stirring up. I saw this earlier, and I passed on for fear of raising too much difficulty. What is this? Said Thrasymachus. Do you think these people have come here on some gold rush and not to hear arguments? Yes, said I, arguments in measure. Yes, Socrates, said Glaucon, but for reasonable people, their whole life hearing arguments like these is the measure. But do not be concerned about us, and for your own part, do not tire at all of expanding upon your views about what will be the manner of this sharing of children and of women among our guardians, and the rearing of the young ones in the intervening years after they are born and before their education. A troublesome period, it seems, so try to describe the manner in which this should happen. Blessed man, said I, this is not easy to explain, since it involves a great deal that is difficult to accept, even more than what we dealt with previously. Indeed, it may be hard to believe that what is said is possible, and even if it were somehow or other to become a reality, it may be hard to accept that these would be the best arrangements. That is why, dear friend, there is some reluctance to touch them at all, in case the argument looks like vain hope. Let there be no hesitation, said he, for your hearers will be neither unsympathetic, nor incredulous, nor negative. And, said I, the best of men, I presume you wish to encourage me by saying this. I do. Well, you're doing the exact opposite. If I believed I knew what I was talking about, your encouragement would be well placed. For to speak the truth when you know it, among reasonable people and friends, on matters of great importance that are dear to your heart, is safe and encouraging. But to construct arguments when you are still in doubt and still seeking, which is what I am doing, is a frightening and perilous undertaking. Not for fear of being laughed at, that's a trivial concern, but that I shall stumble from the truth and bring down not just myself, but my friends too, on issues we should not stumble from at all. And I prostrate myself before Adriesta Glaucon for what I am about to say. For I expect that it is a lesser error to become a murderer by mistake than deceive noble and good people about what is just and lawful. Now, it is better to run this risk among enemies rather than friends, so you do well to encourage me. Glaucon laughed and said, But Socrates, if we experience any disquiet over your argument, we shall acquit you as if you had been charged with murder. To us you are pure and not a deceiver, so take heart and speak. Well then, according to the law, someone acquitted in court is pure. So that is likely to be so in this situation too. Then speak now that this is resolved. In this case, I said, we need to go back over this once more and say now in due order whatever we probably should have said at the time. And perhaps this would be the correct way. After the male drama had been described thoroughly, let us go on and conclude the female drama, especially since it is what you're asking me to do. Indeed, in my opinion, for people whose nature and education is as we have described it, there is not another correct way of possessing and dealing with children and women, besides proceeding in the direction in which we first sent them. In our account, we attempted, I believe, to establish the men as guardians of a herd. Yes. Well, let us follow this up by assigning them the relevant birth and upbringing, and consider whether that is appropriate for our purposes or not. In what way? As follows. Do we think female guard dogs should guard whatever the male guards along with them, and hunt and share in the other duties too? Or should they be kept at home, indoors, unable to do all this because they bear the puppies and rear them, while the males go out to work and have total responsibility for the flock? They should share in everything, said he, except that we should employ the females as weaker and the males as stronger. Now, it is possible, said I, to employ any creature in the same roles as any other creature, if they have not received the same upbringing and education. Well, that is not possible. So, if we are to employ women in the same roles as men, they also should be taught the same things. Yes. Music and gymnastics were given to the men. Yes. In that case, these two skills should be given to women too, along with anything related to warfare, and they should be employed in the same ways. That is likely, said he, from what you were saying. Perhaps then, said I, compared to what we are used to, a lot of what we are now describing might appear comical, if practiced in the way as being described. Very much so. What do you regard as the most comical aspect of all this? Or is it, of course, the prospect of the women exercising naked in the palestras alongside the men? And not just the young women, but the older women, too. Just like the old men in the gymnasium when they are wrinkled and not a pleasant sight, who love their gymnastics nevertheless. Yes, by Zeus, said he, that would look comical by present-day standards at least. Well, since our discussion is underway, we should not be afraid of whatever jokes or whatever kind the witty folk might make about such a transformation taking place in the rails of gymnastics or music, especially in relation to women bearing arms and riding horses. Quite right. And since we have begun to discuss this, we should proceed to the rough terrain of the law and implore the wits to do not what belongs to themselves, but to be serious. And we shall remind them that it is not long since the Greeks thought it disgraceful and comical too, as do most other races today, for men to be seen naked. And when the practice of exercising naked first started among the Cretans, and then among the Spartans, the polite folk of that era got away with making a mockery of all of this. Do you not think so? I do. However, I think once it became evident to those who adopted the practice that it is better to undress for any activities of this sort rather than covering up, then what is comical to the eyes vanished in the face of what reason proclaimed to be best. And this demonstrated what is futile in regard to anything as comical, except what is bad, and that someone who tries to raise a laugh by regarding any other spectacle, apart from stupidity and evil, as comical, will also in all seriousness be setting up another standard of nobility, apart from what is good. Entirely so. Well now, should we not first come to agreement on whether all of this is possible or not, and grant a right of reply in case someone wishes to argue, in jest or seriously, over whether human nature in the case of the female is able to share in all the tasks of the male, or in none of them, or in some but not in others, and over which of these two categories this military role belongs to. Would this not be the very best way to start the process? To ensure that we are likely to finish in the best way too. Very much so, said he. In that case, would you like us to take up the dispute ourselves on their behalf in case the arguments on the other side go undefended against our repeated attacks? There is no reason not to. Then let us say on their behalf, Socrates and Glaucon, there is no need for you to dispute with anyone else, since you yourselves, when you began funding this city of yours, agreed that each individual should engage in the one function that is his own by nature. I believe we may agree to this. Why would we not? Must there not be an enormous difference in nature between a woman and a man? Yes, they must be different. In that case, is it not appropriate to assign a different function to each, the one that is by their own nature? Of course. So how can you avoid falling into that error now, and saying the opposite of what you yourselves said before by maintaining that although men and women are vastly different in nature, they should perform the same functions? Well, my wonderful friend, what defense will you be able to offer in response to this? It is not very easy, said he, to respond so suddenly, but I shall ask you, and I am asking you, to elaborate the case on our behalf, whatever that is. These, dear Glaucon, and many others like them, are the issues that I was afraid of when I foresaw them a while ago, and I was so reluctant to deal with the law concerning the possession and upbringing of women and children. It does not seem to be an easy subject to deal with, he said. Not at all, by Zeus. Indeed not, said I. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of whether someone falls into a little bathing pool or in the middle of a vast sea, nonetheless, he swims. Very much so. Should we not swim too, and attempt to save ourselves from the argument, hoping that some dolphin or some other unusual savior would pick us up? Quite likely, said he. Well, come on then, said I. Let us find some way out of this. Although we agree, of course, that a different nature should engage in a different activity, and that women and men differ in nature, we are now maintaining that these different natures should engage in the same activities. Are these the accusations against us? Yes, precisely. Dear Glaucon, said I, how noble is the power of the skill of contradiction. Why? Because, said I, it seems to me that many people fall into this unintentionally and believe they are not arguing but engaging in discussion. This is because they are unable to consider what is being said by making distinctions on the basis of forms. So they pursue their opposition to what is being said based upon a word, employing argumentation rather than dialectic towards one another. Yes, indeed, said he, that is what happens to a lot of people. But surely this does not apply to us at the moment. It certainly does, said I, since we are in danger of engaging, unintentionally, in contradiction. How? Only on the basis of the word. We are very vigorously and argumentatively pursuing the point that different natures should have different pursuits. But we did not consider in any way what kind of different nature we were distinguishing when we assigned different pursuits to a different nature, and the same to the same. No, said he, we did not consider this. In that case, we may, it seems, ask ourselves if the nature of bald men and long-headed men is the same or the opposite. And should we agree that it is the opposite and bald men engage in shoemaking, we would not allow hairy men to do it. And again, if hairy men did so, we would not let the others do so. Well, that would be ridiculous indeed. Yes, but for what reason? Is it not because at the time we were not speaking of the nature that was the same or different in every respect? Rather, we were paying attention only to that form of difference or sameness that applies to the pursuits themselves. We meant, for instance, that a man and a woman with the soul of a physician have the same nature. Do you not think so? I do. But a physician and a builder have a different nature. Completely different, I suppose. Well, if it turns out that the male sex and the female sex excel at some skill or in any pursuit, should we not then declare that this should be assigned to them? But if it merely turns out that they differ in that the female bears the offspring while the male begets them, and in this respect alone, then we shall maintain that nothing more has yet been presented that is relevant to what we are saying about how a woman differs from a man. And we shall go on thinking that our guardians and their women should engage in the same pursuits. And rightly so. Now, after this, should we not ask anyone who says the opposite to explain precisely this to us? And what, in relation to what skill or pursuit, relevant to the condition of our city, is the nature of a woman and a man not the same, but different? Well, that is fair enough. But perhaps someone else might also say what you said a little earlier, that although it is not easy to respond adequately to that, adequately then and there, given time to consider, the matter is not difficult. Yes, they might say that. So, do you want us to ask the person who raises such objections as these to follow us, in case we may somehow demonstrate to him that there is no pursuit related to the administration of the city that is particular to a woman? Entirely so. Well, come on then, we will say to him, answer us. In what way do you mean that one person has a natural gift for something while another one does not? Is it that one person learns it easily while the other has difficulty? Would the one with minimal instruction discover a lot for himself about the subject he has been taught, while the other, despite a great deal of instruction and study, would not even retain what he has been taught? And is whatever belongs to the body adequately subservient to thought in one case and opposed to it in the other? Are these criteria by which you distinguish the naturally gifted person from the one who is not, or are there others? No one, said he, will maintain there are others. Now, do you know anything that is practiced by humanity in which the male sex does not excel over the female in all these respects? Or are we to go on at length about weaving and attending to pancakes and stews, in which the female sex does have a reputation, and where it is utterly laughable for them to lose out to a man? I can outcook most people. Just saying. That is true, said he. You could say that one sex is much surpassed by the other in everything. And although many women are better than many men in many respects, the situation is on the whole as you describe it. So, my friend, in the case of those who manage the city, there is no pursuit that belongs to a woman because she is a woman, or to a man because he is a man. The natures are distributed in like manner among both creatures, and a woman by nature shares in all the pursuits, and so does a man, although a woman is weaker than a man in every case. Entirely so. Well then, shall we allocate them all to the men and none to the women? How could we? On the contrary, we shall maintain and presume that one woman is by nature inclined to be a physician, while another is not, and one is musical, while one is non-musical, of course. And is one woman inclined towards gymnastics and warfare, while another has an aversion to warfare, and is no lover of gymnastics? Yes, I think so. What about this? Will one be a lover of wisdom, while another hates it? Will one be spirited, while another is devoid of it? That is the case also. So, one woman also has the qualities of a guardian, while another does not, since this was the sort of nature we selected in the case of our male guardians, was it not? This sort indeed. So, in the guardianship of a city, the nature of a man and a woman is the same, except insofar as one is weaker and the other is stronger, apparently. Well, in that case, women of this sort should be elected to live with and exercise guardianship with men of this sort, if they are indeed up to the task and akin to them in nature. Entirely so. And should not the pursuits be allocated to the same natures? The same. So after all of that, we've come back to our previous considerations, and we accept that it is not contrary to nature to prescribe music and gymnastics to our women guardians. Entirely so. In that case, we are not passing impossible laws, like vain hopes, since we propose a law in accordance with nature. Rather, our present-day practices that run counter to this are, it seems, more opposed in nature. So it seems. Was not our inquiry concerned with whether our proposals might be possible and for the best? It was indeed. And have we agreed that they are actually possible? Yes. Then do we agree that they are for the best? Of course. Well, when it comes to creating a woman guardian, we will not need one education to produce the men and a different one to produce the women. Why will we? Especially since it is taking charge of the same nature. No, not a different one. Now, what view do you hold on the following issue? What issue? Do you presume that some men are better while others are worse? Or do you think they are all alike? Not at all. Now, in the city we are founding, who do you think turned out to be our better men The guardians who receive the education we described, or the shoemakers who have been educated in shoemaking? What a funny question to ask, said he. I understand, said he. And what about the other citizens? Are not these guardians the best of them? Very much so. What about these guardian women? Will they not be the best of the women? That is also the case, very much so. And is there anything better for a city than the presence of the very best women and men? There is not. And will gymnastics and music and gymnastics, applied in the way we have described them, bring this about? Of course. So, not only is the regulation we propose possible, but it is also best for the city. Quite so. Then the women guardians must undress, since they will be clothed in excellence rather than garments. And they must share the military role and the other duties of a guardian of the city, and not engage in anything else. Although in the exercise of these lighter duties should be assigned to the women rather than the men because of the weakness of their sex. But the man who laughs at naked women exercising with the best of intentions plucks the fruit of laughter, unmatured by wisdom, and does not know what he is laughing at, it seems, or even what he is doing. Indeed, this is surely expressed most beautifully, and always will be, by the saying, what is beneficial is beautiful, and what is harmful is ugly. Entirely so. May we then proclaim that we are escaping this first wave, so to speak, without being swept away completely, by describing the law in relation to women's affairs. We propose that our male and female guardians should share in all pursuits. But does the argument somehow or other agree with itself, since it describes what is possible and beneficial too? Yes, indeed, said he, it is no small wave that we are escaping. You will not say that this one is big, said I, when you see the next one. Keep talking, said he, let us see. There is, in my opinion, said I, a law that follows from this, and from whatever else has been said before. What is it? These women are all shared among all these men, and no woman is to live together in private with any man. And all the women, all the children too are shared, and no parent is to know its offspring, or any child its parent. This presents a much greater credibility issue than the previous one, in terms of possibility and also of its benefit. I do not think so, said I. There would be disputes over the benefit, since there is a great good, is there not, in women being shared, and children too, if it can be done. But I think there would be much dispute over whether it is possible or not. Both issues would be disputed, well and truly. You mean that there is an alliance of arguments against me? I thought I had escaped the first one, provided you would accept that the arrangement would be beneficial, and I would be left with the question of whether it is possible or not. Well, your escape did not go unnoticed, so give account of both. Then I must pay the penalty, but gratify me to this extent. Allow me a holiday, just as people who are mentally lazy are in the habit of indulging themselves when they proceed on their own. In fact, people like this, before discovering how something they desire will come into existence, somehow set that question aside so that they will not tire themselves by deliberating over whether it is possible or not. They assume that what they want already exists and set about arranging everything else. And they delight in working out the sort of things that they will do now that this has come into existence, thus making an already lazy soul even lazier. Well, I too am getting soft at this stage, and I wish to postpone these issues and investigate how they are possible later on. Just now, on the assumption that they are possible, I shall, if you let me, consider how the rulers will arrange all of this in detail once the system is in place, and whether their implementation would be more advantageous than anything else for the city and its guardians. These, if you let me, are the issues I shall first attempt to consider in detail for you. We shall consider those others later. I am letting you go ahead and consider this. Well, I think that if our guardians are to be really worthy of this name, their auxiliaries likewise, the latter should be willing to follow orders, and the former to issue them. In some cases, obeying our laws themselves, and in other cases, those in which we transfer responsibility to them, they will imitate our laws when giving their orders. Quite likely, said he. Then you, their lawgiver, just as you selected the men, should also select the women, to bestow upon them women who are as similar to them in nature as possible. And these people, since they have shared dwelling places and meal tables, and no one possesses anything of this sort privately, will be together. And, having mingled with one another in the gymnasium, and throughout their general upbringing, they will be necessarily be drawn by innate nature to intercourse with one another. Or do you think this lacks the force of necessity? Well, the necessities of geometry at any rate, but those of love, which are surely more potent at persuading and drawing most people? Very much so, said I. But besides all this, Glaucon, to have intercourse or do anything else at all in a random manner is unholy in a city of happy people, and the rulers will not allow it. No, that would not be just. Then it is obvious that we should next make marriages sacred to the best of our ability, and those that are most beneficial would be sacred. Entirely so. Well, in that case, how shall they be most beneficial? Tell me this, Glaucon. I notice that you have dogs for hunting and quite a number of well-bred birds at home. Now, by Zeus, have you noticed anything about their unions and their production of offspring? What sort of thing? Firstly, although they are well-bred, are there not some that are, or turn out to be, the very best? There are. Now, do you breed from all of them in a like manner? Or are you careful to do so as much as possible from the best of them? From the best. And do you breed from the youngest or from the oldest? Or as much as possible from those in their prime? From those in their prime. And if they are not bred in this way, do you believe your stock of birds and hounds will be much worse? I do. And in the case of horses and other animals, is the situation any different? It would be strange, said he, if it were different. Well, well, my dear friend, our rulers will need to be at their very best if the situation is the same in the case of the human race. But the situation is the same, said he. What of it? Because they will need to make use of many medicines, and presumably in cases where bodies do not need medicine, because they are responsive to a particular lifestyle. We regard even an ordinary physician as sufficient. But whatever is necessary to make use of medicines, we know that a bolder physician is required. That is true, but what are you referring to? To the following. It is likely that our leaders will have to resort to falsehood on a large scale, and deception too, for the benefit of their subjects. And we maintain, I believe, that everything of this sort is useful as a form of medicine. And rightly so. And the fact that it is right turns out to be the most significant in the case of marriages, and in the production of offspring. How so? Based upon what has already been agreed, the best should have the intercourse with the best, as often as possible, and the worst with the worst as seldom as possible. And the offspring of the former should be reared, and those of the latter should not. And if the flock is to be at its pinnacle, and all of this should take place without anyone knowing about it except the rulers themselves. If our herd of guardians, for its part, is to be as free of faction as possible. Quite right. And in that case, should there not be some festivals instituted by law at which we bring together the brides and the bridegrooms? And should there not be sacrifices too? And should not our poets compose hymns appropriate to the marriages that are taking place? We shall make the rulers responsible for the number of marriages so that they may, as best they can, maintain the population at the same level, taking war, disease, and anything else into consideration. As far as possible, neither allow our city to become too big or too small. Right, said he. Then I think a certain ingenious lottery should be devised, so that the ordinary person will blame chance rather than the rulers for each union. Yes, indeed. And to these young men who are somehow best in war, or I presume in anything else, honors and prizes should be given, in particular, more generous opportunity for intercourse with the women, so that as many children as possible may be begotten from men like these, while affording an excuse for this at the same time. Right? And any offspring that are born will be taken over by the officials responsible for these matters, who may be men or women or both, since official posts, too, are presumably shared between women and men. Yes. Then I think, having taken the offspring of the good, they will transfer them into the fold to special nurses who dwell apart in some precinct of the city, while the offspring of the inferior or of any of the others that are born with deformities, they will hide away in secret, undisclosed place as appropriate. Yes, said he, if the race of guardians is to be kept pure. Would not these officials also take responsibilities for the nursing and bringing the mothers to the fold when they are full of milk, ensuring by every possible means that none recognizes her own child, providing other women who have milk if ever the mothers do not have enough? They will also be responsible for the mothers themselves, so that they do not spend too much time in feeding, and will hand over the sleepless nights and the rest of the hardship to wet nurses and carers. By your account, said he, childbearing will be very easy for the women of the guardians, as it should be. But we should proceed to the next suggestion we made, for we said that the offspring should be bred from parents in their prime. True. Now, are you also of the view that for a woman in her prime lasts about 20 years, and for a man about 30? Which years, he said. A woman is to bear children for the city, beginning from her 20th year until her 40th, while a man, once he has passed the age at which he can run most swiftly, begets children for the city until the age of 55. Well, in both cases, said he, this is the prime of body and mind. Now, if those who take to begetting for the community are older or younger than this, we shall maintain that their error is neither holy nor just, as a child has been born to the city who, if this goes unnoticed, will have been born without the sacrifices and prayers offered at every marriage by priests and priestesses, and by all of the city, that better offspring of greater benefit to the city may always be born from good people and from the city's benefactors. But this child would have been born of darkness, accompanied by a shocking lack of restraint. Quite right. And the same applies if a man, still at the right age to beget children, has a relationship with any woman of that age, without the ruler bringing them together. For we shall state that he is imposing an illegitimate, unauthorized, and unsanctified child upon the city. and rightly so. But presumably, once the women and the men have passed the age for reproduction, we shall set them free to form relationships with anyone they want, except daughter or mother, or the children of daughters, or the mothers of a mother, in the case of men, or in the case of women, a son, a father, or the descendants and the ancestors of them. We shall allow all of this only after we have directed them to take particular care that no child sees the light of day if any is conceived. And if any child forces its way into the light, this should be dealt with on the basis that such offspring are not to be reared. Yes, that all sounds quite reasonable. But how will they recognize one another's fathers and daughters, and the other relatives you mentioned? They will not. Not at all. But any offspring born in the 10th month, and indeed the 7th month, after he became a bridegroom, all these he shall address as his son if they are male, and as his daughter if they are female. And they, in turn, shall address these men as their father. And similarly, he shall call their offspring his grandchildren, and these, for their part, shall call his age group grandfathers and grandmothers. Those born during the time when their mothers and fathers were begetting children shall call each other brothers and sisters. So that, as we were saying just now, they will not have intercourse with one another. But the law will grant that brothers and sisters may dwell together if the lot falls accordingly. And the Pythia adds a favorable response. Sorry. Absolutely correct. Well, Gluck, on this or something like this is the sharing of women and children among the guardians of the city. But we should next confirm from the argument that this fits with the rest of our system of government, as is by far the best arrangement. Or how should we proceed? In this way, Bazoo City. Now, is our first step towards agreement to ask ourselves what precisely we can say is the greatest good for the fabric of our city, a good that the lawgiver should aim at when instituting the laws, and what is the greatest evil, and then investigate whether everything we described in detail just now matches the footprint of the good and not the footprint of the evil. Most of all, well, do we know any greater evil for a city than that which tears it asunder and makes it many rather than one? Or do we know any greater good than that which binds it together and makes it one? We do not. Does not the sharing of pleasure and pain bind it together whenever, to the greatest extent possible, all the citizens are pleased and pained to the same extent by the same successes and failures? Entirely so. And do not personal responses on occasions like these break the city apart, whenever some of its people are troubled while others are delighted, when the very same things are happening to the city or its inhabitants? Of course. Now, does something like this arise because expressions like mine and not mine are not uttered in our city at the same time? And the same applies to the word alien. Yes, precisely. Then the city in which the most people say mine and not mine about the same things in the same respect is the best managed city. Very much so. Is it also the one that bears the closest resemblance to a single human being? For instance, imagine one of us injures his finger. The entire community, extending from the body to the soul, in a single arrangement under the ruling element, perceives this in itself, and all of it experiences the pain together, simultaneously, as a whole, even though it only suffered a part of the injury. And so we say accordingly that the person has pain in his finger. And the same argument applies to any other part of the person at all, whether there is pain because the part suffers, or pleasure because it finds relief. The same indeed, and in answer to your question, the best administered city is closest to such an arrangement. So I imagine, when anything, good or bad, happens to any one of its citizens, A city like this is most inclined to say that the victim is her own, and the entire city will share in the pleasure of the pain, necessarily if it is well regulated at any rate. Now would be the time for us to revisit our own city and observe therein the principles agreed in the argument, and see if the city embodies them more than any other. Should we not do so then? Said he. Well, what about this? In other cities there are, I presume, rulers and the populace, and they are present in this city of ours too. They are. And do all of these people refer to one another as fellow citizens? Of course. And what else besides fellow citizens do the people in other cities call the rulers? In most cities they call them masters, but in those governed democratically, they call them just this, rulers. And what about the populace in our city? What do they call the rulers, besides fellow citizens? Saviors and helpers, said he. And what do our rulers call the populace? Paymasters who give them sustenance. And in the other cities, the rulers call the populace slaves. And what do the rulers call one another? Fellow rulers. And ours, fellow guardians. Now, can you tell me whether any of the rulers of the other cities can refer to one fellow ruler as kindred and to another as not kindred? Very much so. Does he not regard the kindred as his own and the non-kindred as not his own and speak accordingly? So he does. And what about your guardians? Would any of them be able to regard any of their fellow guardians as non-kindred or speak of them as such? Not at all, says he, since in the case of anyone he meets, he will think he is meeting a brother or sister, a father or mother, a son or a daughter, or their offspring, or their forebears. Excellent. But tell me this too. Will your laws merely ordain that they should use these names of kinship? Or will you ordain that they should act in accordance with these names in all their activities? In the case of fathers, should they do whatever the law relating to fathers ordains in terms of respect and care, and the obedience that is due to parents, without which they will not fare well with the gods or their fellow men, because their actions would be neither holy nor just if they were to act in any other way? Should these proclamations ring from the very outset in the ears of the children, sung by all the citizens about the fathers, that anyone might point out to them and about their relatives too? These are the ones, said he, for it would be laughable if the names were to be on their lips, without the deeds to back them up. So in this city, most of all, whenever any one citizen fares well or fares badly, all the citizens together will pronounce the words we used just now and say that what is mine fares well, or what is mine fares badly. Very true, said he. And did we not also say that with this belief and these words, there came a sharing of pleasures and pains? And we were right to say so. Will not our citizens, most of all, share in the same thing which they will all call mine? And by sharing this in this way, will they not, most of all, have shared pleasure and pain? Very much so. Now, is it not the cause of all of this, besides the general constitution of the city, the sharing of women and children among the guardians? Yes, said he, very much more than anything else. And we did agree that this was the greatest good for the city, comparing a well-managed city to the human body in terms of its response to pleasure or pain in a part of itself. And we were right to agree. So the sharing of children and of women among the auxiliaries has turned out to be the cause of the city's greatest good. Yes, indeed. In that case, we are also being consistent with what went before. For we said, I believe, that they should have no private households or land or any other possession, that they should rather receive sustenance from everyone else as their guardian's pay, and should all spend it together if they really are guardians. Yes. So is it not the case, as I say, that whatever was said before is being said now, turns them into true guardians to an even greater extent, and prevents them from tearing the city asunder by using the word mine to refer not to the same thing, but to something different. One man dragging whatever he is able to acquire on his own off to his own house, while another fellow drags things to a different house, also his own, with a separate wife and children, thus introducing the private pleasures and pains of private persons. Rather, with a single belief concerning what is private, all striving as best they can for the same objective, they have the same experience of pain and pleasure. Precisely. What about this? Will not lawsuits and accusations against one another almost vanish from their midst because they will have no private property, apart from their own body, while everything else is shared? And thus they will be free from any factions that people develop because of the acquisition of wealth, children, or family connections. Yes, they will be free of all of that. They really must. And indeed, there will be no justification for legal action, for assault or violence among them. For we shall presumably maintain that self-defense against people of the same age is noble and just, and impose upon them the requirements to look after their bodies. And rightly so. And this law is right in the following way too. If someone was provoked by someone else, he might satisfy his rage through a personal encounter of sort, and be less inclined to keep going until there were more serious conflicts. Yes, certainly. What is more, an older man will be given the task of ruling over and restraining all of the younger ones. Of course. And indeed, a younger person will not, unless the rulers commanded, use force against someone older, nor is he likely to strike him, nor, I believe, will he show disrespect in any other way either. For the twin guardians, fear and shame prevent this. Shame prevents him from laying hands upon a possible parent, and fear, he fears the help others will give to the victim, either as his sons, brothers, or fathers. Yes, that follows. Under these laws, then, the men will enjoy great peace towards one another in every respect. Great indeed. And in the absence of any other conflict among themselves, there would be no danger of any faction between them and the rest of the city or one another. No, there would not. I am reluctant to mention the most trivial difficulties, which they will be quit of because they are so unseemly. The flattery of the rich by the poor, and troubles and pains involved in rearing children, and making money to provide for the needs of the household members by borrowing from some people and failing to repay others, using every possible means to provide resources that they then hand over to the women and household members to manage. All that they suffer over these matters, and what it is like, is self-evident, and it is ignoble and unworthy of mention. Yes, it is evident, said he, even to a blind man. Quit of all this, our guardians will live a life more blessed than the life of the Olympic victors. In what way? And we will pick up the rest of the argument on the other side in the next episode. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a not too complicated topic. I don't agree with most of this, right? Like, I think that people should be able to choose what they do, absolutely, but I am not in any way okay with the state ever taking children or assigning who you have to sleep with. And so I'm not going to argue with the argument of a man 3,000 years dead, but I am going to point that out right here. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.